Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory to him forever.
The presentation I'm doing is based on marriage, life, love in the divine plan. This was put out by the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops a couple years ago. If you get the opportunity to review this, it's a very, very worthwhile set of documents. Okay. Then this is what it's based on. Now, I will point out that the presentation I'm doing tonight is an adaptation of that presentation. Since this was done by the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops, it was done from a Latin point of view. Okay? That's not a bad thing, it's just something to deal with. Our theology in certain areas is different than the Latin theology. Because of that, I've adapted it to deal with our way of viewing things. That's not to say, of course, that the Latin Church is wrong, but they're looking at it from a different point of view. Okay, so this is something to understand. The first point we have to think about when you think about marriage is, what is the ultimate origin of marriage? Where does it come from? Because it's something that exists throughout human society. Any society that you study, anyone that you take a look at, has the idea of marriage, of a man and a woman joined permanently for mutual support and for the care and upbringing of children. If you boil it down into the simplest form, that's what marriage in a non-theological sense is based on. Those are the things that you're looking for. And any society that you look at has that to one degree or another. Now, there are some societies where they enlarge the number. You know, for example, in an Islamic society where men are allowed to have, besides the one wife, they have the option for multiple. But they always start with the basic unit of 1 and 1. Okay? And this is something that's across the entire world. And if you look at it from a historian's point of view, which is what my training is, it's all through history. Where does that come from? Well, what the church would teach is that you're looking at the fact that man and woman was created in the image and likeness of God. That this is something that's hardwired into what we are. And that is why, no matter what religion or lack of religion or period or culture or across history, it's still there. The other thing to note with that is if we look at it from the point of view of faith, this is something that existed before the fall. After all, Eve was made from Adam as a helpmate, as a partner. After the fall, that didn't change. The institution of marriage pre-existed the fall, but outlasted it. God so loved us that this concept of marriage as a way of uniting and strengthening family and strengthening the individuals is something that we were maintained and given that outlasted the sin that drove us out of paradise. That's an important thing to think about, because it indicates just how central to human society this notion is. And it shows in that moment. It's not saying that, explicitly stated, but if you think about it, it is something that is there. Now, when you look at this notion of marriage, one of the things you also have to consider is, how does this affect a society? Is it possible to have a functioning society without this absolute bedrock notion? Historically, you would say no, because every single one has had it. It seems to be something that we understand is a necessity for support of one another and for the raising of children, which are united concepts. Now, please note, one thing that often confuses people is the concept of sacramental marriage, which we have within the church, versus natural marriage. Often you will ask questions about, well, if someone was, two people married outside the church, do they have a real marriage? Well, the church teaches is if they are attempting to do so, we accept it as such. It may not be sacramental, but it's real, because that's what they intended to do. That's also why, for example, if there's situations where people are married outside the faith, or they never were in the faith and come in and things like that, all those sort of issues are, we suggest, should be taken to a marriage tribunal, because the experts in canon law can examine it. But the general rule is if a man and woman attempt to make a real marriage in a proper format of whatever faith they're from, it's real. Okay? And that's important, because every once in a while people have odd questions, and this is where it comes from. By the way, as I'm going through this, I may ask you questions.
Don't ask me.
Just to keep you on your toes. I don't want to see anybody sleeping with my dog, so I will do that. And if anyone has questions for me, please stop me. I'm perfectly, willing to handle that. If the answer is I don't know, that's what you get. Okay. But please don't save them for the end. I'd much rather deal with them while you're thinking about them, while they're real, because if you're thinking about it, someone else may be thinking about it too. And if I'm missing something, let's make sure that it gets taken care of immediately. Now, moving on from this concept of a natural, basic marriage, that's something that's hardwired into human life as part of this basic notion, we then move forward to the idea of a spiritual union. Now, what's the earliest notions of that? Where do you see it first in the scriptures? I've already answered this question.
Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. Okay. Because they were joined together. There wasn't an explicit, ceremony, but we assume that was a part of it, and that's how the church views it, is from the moment of creation of man and woman together, that we were joined together by God. That is a very important thing to note, and this is somewhat different than Western theology on this one note. Eastern theology is explicitly, directly Trinitarian. Think about how many times during the Divine Liturgy that the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, are stated. Think about how many times you cross yourself during the liturgy. Every time it happens, well, if you sit and count, that's a lot of times. Our liturgy, our theology is expressly very, very Trinitarian. The Latin is also, but they handle it somewhat differently. When you are married, it's not a couple, it's a trinity. You, your wife, and God. You're joined together. And you have to remember something. The person in charge is not you. It's not you. It's God. This is an important aspect of how marriage is considered in our theology. Because one of the problems is we all have a tendency, and I've been married now for 25 years, we all have a tendency of thinking of myself, what my needs, what my wants, what I want to do, without asking the question necessarily, what is it that God's calling us to do? We are joined together for what reason? Is it really my convenience? Is it really because, I had nothing to do better on Saturday night? Why are we married? And part of it is so that we can grow with our relationship to Jesus Christ. Our relationship to God. Is God one single entity by himself? I hope that we have an answer on this one really quick. Otherwise, you're going to scare me to death. Okay? Let's hear it.
No.
Thank you. Don't scare me. It's not good for the soul heart. All right. God is a trinity. It is a community. So is marriage. We are called to be sharing each other's love. And by doing that, helping one another to grow. Do you and your wife have exactly the same strengths and the same weaknesses? No. Now, I think anyone else who has been married for any period of time would absolutely know that that's not the case. We complement each other. There are certain things that you're better at, and there are certain things that you're better at. And that's okay. You complement each other. You work together. What I often describe as being in a harness together. we're all pulling together, hopefully, in the same direction. But it's not a pair, it's a troika. There's three in this group together. And if it's done properly, it's with God at the lead. Because the ultimate goal is by you being married, of joining yourselves together, it's not only to improve your material life here, it's so you can bring each other to heaven. So through your work, through your care for each other, through your love, you are helping each other be closer and closer to the reality of God. We are called to be living icons of Christ. We are called to reflect that which is the spiritual truth. We're trying to be getting closer and closer. This sort of loving sharing and sharing of each other's pain and each other's weaknesses, and by doing so, gaining strength moving forward, is part of it. But too often, especially in our society, we ignore that. We don't think about it. Because we're so worried about the house payment and paying for the car, and what the vacation's going to be, and all these other things that come up, that it disappears. You forget about it. There's an old saying, if something isn't growing, it's dying. Because nothing stays static. If something's alive, it has to be growing. But in order for that growth to happen, it means that we have to sit back, stop, look at ourselves, look at our marriages, look at our relationships, and saying, am I helping my beloved to get closer to God? Or am I hindrance? Because those are the two options. Okay? Those are the only two possibilities you have. By looking at marriage as part of the Trinitarian theology, the fact that it's not just you and me, the fact that we're part of something bigger, it reminds us what we're pointing towards. That we're looking at the growth of us individually and as a family, closer and closer to the reality that is Jesus Christ.